The ones that we take, that's secondary. In terms of economics, you should think of antibiotics that way, as something that we mostly give to animals, and also, from time to time, take ourselves, often stupidly.
You're listening to Narcotica, a podcast giving you the straight dope about drugs and the people who use them.
Drugs shape our culture in many ways that people don't always think about, and some of the least safe drug use can actually be sanctioned by doctors or brought on by heavy pressure in society to be the best. I'm talking about antibiotic resistance and doping at the Olympics. These are two pretty unrelated ideas, but as you'll hear, these are two topics that are not really talked about. I'm Troy Farah, and you're listening to Narcotica. Today, we've got a special guest. Well, all of our guests are special. This one is named Mike Pearl. He's sitting in my kitchen in the high desert. He drove up here all the way from Los Angeles, and he's here to talk about his new book, The Day It Finally Happens: Alien Contact, Dinosaur Parks, Immortal Humans, and Other Possible Phenomena. Mike, welcome to the show.
Hello, it's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
So you were a staff writer at Vice for about 3 years. You've also written for The Hollywood Reporter and The Outline, and you went to school at Chapman University for screenwriting. And it bears mentioning that you edited me once for a single article on Vice.com 4 years ago, just trying to be transparent here. But I would say that your beat, Mike, you know, journalists have beats or topics that they regularly cover, like healthcare or criminal justice. I would say your beat is despair.
Okay, that's fair. I mean, I like to say that my beat is the future, but you know, the way that I think we sort of look at the future these days, they're sort of the same, the future and despair, unfortunately. So if you want to say I cover despair, that's I'll take it.
Yeah. Well, now you have this book. It's kind of exploring the future in this interesting way. It's taking a lot of these wild worst case scenarios, like what happens when the last fish in the ocean dies, or truly bizarre hypothetical situations, like what if a real life Jurassic Park opens. It's kind of structured like Flash Forward, this podcast that imagines a scenario as if it had just happened in yesterday's news, then breaks down this potential future using facts and experts. And it seems like a lot of international travel.
Yeah, it's sort of like trying to put things that we think about with that we sort of like that we worry about or fantasize about, but we don't sort of think about like what comes after the breakthrough has occurred, what comes next. And so I'm trying to make that sort of realistic and tangible in people's minds, and using as much real research and firsthand accounts as I possibly can, so that it's not just like me speculating wildly. Although I do also speculate wildly from time to time.
Right. And there's a good amount of humor in there as well.
Oh, thank you. I try. I'm not the funniest guy in the world, but I try.
This is a show about drugs and the people that use them. And so we're going to be talking about two chapters from the book: The Day Antibiotics Don't Work Anymore, and The Day Doping is Allowed at the Olympics. So I want to get more of an overview of the book first. For me, some of your reporting has kind of been therapeutic because I'm an anxious person. I'm always thinking about the end of the world, trademark, because as a kid, I grew up in this evangelical household that was saturated with apocalyptic themes, from the Left Behind series to all the anxiety about Y2K, then 9/11 happened. So being able to go to the extreme and see what some of the actual risks are, what some of the actual evidence for whatever happening is, it's been kind of soothing in a way. And you've been very open about your own anxiety. So what motivated you to write this book?
You know, you touched on it almost exactly. I think there's an eschatological bent with the way that people, for like my lifetime at least, have looked at the present, both the present and the future. Left Behind, I think, is a big part of that. There are a lot of people in a lot of different religious communities who are at this point in time very, very fixated on the world coming to an end. And there's no real evidence pointing to an imminent apocalypse of any sort. The apocalypse is a biblical idea. It's not really a scientific idea. We we're not really within range of the circumstances necessary to bring about human extinction. Not really, but we always talk like we are. Climate change is something that will be absolutely catastrophic, that will bring about perhaps billions of deaths, but that's not human extinction. We worry about what would happen if the antibiotic chapter is a really good example. We have it's an understatement to say that we should be worried about these things, but it's quite an overstatement to say that for the most part any one of these things is going to literally kill us all. But the idea that something is going to kill us all is kind of the only way. It's the only place our mind goes. Nuclear weapons, sort of same thing. If there was a regional nuclear war where 100 nuclear weapons were used, that would bring about a nuclear winter, and a nuclear winter would kill billions again. That's not everyone. So when these things happen, they change everything. They cause immense tragedy, but we claw our way through it. We clawed our way through tragedies before, through World War I, through the Spanish flu, which was arguably worse, and through World War II. Those were, in a sense, apocalypses. Those were unbelievably catastrophic human tragedies, but we survived. And I think if you write about these things in the abstract, you would have said, like, as World War II was gearing up, if war breaks out in Serbia, then my God, think about how terrible that would be, because then Austria and Hungary would be pulled in, and then Russia would be pulled in, and the world would end. But it caused a war, but the world didn't end. So when you game these things out, then we find out that, hell yeah, they're scary. They're super scary. This stuff is scary as hell. But I think the point of it was to say that, like, one way or another, we probably make it, and that's the tangible reality of human tragedy. That the scariest part, in a sense, is that we have to figure out how to become a species that endures that thing and then gets through it, gets to the other side. So
it was writing this book, the process of it, kind of reassuring? Did it help you find more optimism about the future?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, especially toward the end, because I tried to get all the way to the heat death of the universe, and because I think people say inevitable heat death of the universe, and when I started asking around to physicists, I was like, is there really an inevitable heat death of the universe? And they were like, oh, I mean, if you actually look at the things that could end the universe, most of them come way before heat death. There could be vacuum decay. Vacuum decay is this circumstance where essentially the fundamental laws of physics suddenly change, and just everything is more or less blinked out of existence in a moment, and that's something that could happen at any time. And so the heat death of the universe is just like, if you take the math as far as it goes, in terms of entropy and in terms of heat, then everything gets very, very spread out and very, very cold, because that's where the math takes us. But we may well not get there. But the other thing about heat death is that, like, it's only one of these phenomena that we're sort of like learning to game out on a long timeline. And something like dark energy is just the latest in observable scientific phenomena that we do not understand at all. And so what it kind of taught me was not to argue that like humanity will be around together, it will be around forever. It won't. It'll turn into something else. it'll turn into a different species. But it taught me that like we have no reason to assume that we're going to die, that we're all going to die in the near future, and that we should live our lives from that assumption. Everything that is within the sort of like conceivable future is something that when we think about the conceivable future, the sort of like comprehensible future, it makes more sense in human terms to think about how to survive it instead of thinking about rolling over and dying, basically.
Well, let's get back to drugs. This is a drug podcast.
There's plenty of drugs in the book, yeah.
I want to talk about antibiotic resistance first. There are many antibiotics: amoxicillin, doxycycline, azithromycin, or the Z-Pak, and probably the most famous is penicillin. So what is antibiotic resistance, and how serious is this problem?
So what blew my mind about antibiotic resistance, and maybe a lot of people already know this, I didn't until I was researching this for the book, was that when they were giving out the Nobel Prize to Alexander Fleming for inventing penicillin, this was just after World War II, which had been this big coming out party for penicillin. It'd been like the big not the initial rollout, but the big debut was World War II. So this guy who had invented the drug that had saved hundreds of thousands of lives on the battlefield, they gave him the Nobel Prize, and he stood up there and he said, "Hey, don't take too much of this stuff. We could become resistant." He, right then at that moment, he said that to the crowd, and we didn't listen. So what he was saying was that if you're giving out antibiotics and people aren't finishing the course of antibiotics, then what you're essentially doing is exposing a colony of bacteria to the chemical, in this case penicillin, that they can't survive exposure to. Except that a few of them, a tiny number of them, always will, and those ones will. I mean, this is just basic natural selection. You suddenly create a very, very small community of the survivors. And on a long enough timeline, as more and more drugs come out and more bacteria evolve to survive this exposure to antibiotics, then you create colonies that are sort of like boosted by the presence of these survivor organisms. And then when the colonies include those survivor organisms, then those genes get passed on until we get entire colonies of survivors, what we call superbugs. So MRSA is an example of this: methicillin resistant Staphylococcus aureus. I have such a hard time saying it, but I just read the audiobook for my book, so I got a bit used to it. But yeah, so when these bacteria kind of like on a long enough timeline, we create entire subspecies of these bacteria that have a tendency to kill us that we can't treat with our first line bacteria. So we have to go to our second choice down the line, our third choice down the line. So now there's not just MRSA, but we're now seeing so methicillin is out in the case of a lot of these infections when we try to use injectable antibiotics. So then we go down the line, we have vancomycin, and you give somebody vancomycin, that usually works, but now we're seeing resistance to that. And so as we go further and further down the line for a lot of these infections, they lead to worse and worse infections and death. And that means that in short order, in a few decades, we're going to see it becoming more and more prevalent, and then finally it becoming the norm for an infection that you get from a splinter or something like that to be resistant to all of our antibiotics. So suddenly you get that splinter and you have to be quarantined because you have methicillin and vancomycin resistant bacteria that are going to cause you to, get a infection that's going to potentially kill you or sometimes go away on its own. So pretty scary stuff.
And British economist Jim O'Neill, you noted this in your book, predicts that 10 million people will die per year. And the CDC has said that a third of antibiotic prescriptions are unnecessary. As a kid, I remember having antibiotics thrown at me by doctors. Just,
me too.
You're sick. Here, have
bubblegum flavored antibiotics. Yeah.
Some missed doses or failure to finish a course of antibiotics is kind of what helps contribute to this. But also, antibiotics are ubiquitous in meat as well. As you note in the book, 80% of antibiotics are used for livestock that we then eat.
Yeah. That's mostly how we use antibiotics, is when we get animals very big, very, very fast. For various reasons, if you also give them a bunch of antibiotics, they get big faster, because it's not very healthy to be shoveling corn into a cow. It's not really typically good for the cow, but the cow will endure it better if you also pump it full of antibiotics at the same time. And so what we've discovered is that, as convenient as it is to take antibiotics because we have infections, that's a good use of antibiotics. But even better, you can make way more money off of your livestock if you pump them full of this stuff. And as a species, that is how we use antibiotics, is that we give them to the animals that we eat. Like, the ones that we take, that's secondary. In terms of economics, you should think of antibiotics that way, as something that we mostly give to animals, and also from time to time take ourselves, often stupidly.
In the book, you start with this rampage of people killing their pets because of, I'm probably going to screw this up, but psittacosis or parrot fever becomes antibiotic resistant and starts spreading in this scenario that you're predicting or hypothesizing. What would you call it? Guessing.
Yeah. Hypothesizing is good. I like that. Yeah.
1 billion birds is killed. It kind of reminds me of this chicken avian flu outbreak that killed 50 million birds in 2015, according to the USDA. Now, of course, flu is not bacteria. That's a virus. You don't use antibiotics for that. But I just remember this horrible report on NPR of farmers having to go into these big warehouses full of chickens with foam and just spray the foam until it fills up the entire thing, and then the birds just suffocate, and they have to bury them on the land. So when I was reading your book, I was just thinking of this horrific, it's true, if an antibiotic resistant outbreak were to start with animals, which seems most likely because we give them to so many animals, we would just kill so many of them.
Exactly. We would be just so desperate to have that threat neutralized that we're just burning billions of animals on pyres. Yeah, and so that's sort of what each of the scenarios in the book starts with a kind of like little piece of fiction to sort of like set your mind in motion. And this was an interesting chapter to write because I'm far from the first person to write fiction about an antibiotic, about a drug-resistant bacterial outbreak. So what I decided to write was not so much a step-by-step, play-by-play little description of the outbreak itself, but to try and describe the psychology, the mass psychology of a reaction to such an outbreak, because we do know a bit about these bacteria at this point, and we are pretty scared of them. But there, there's never been like a major outbreak of one of these bacteria. So so that was what I did. I took this disease called parrot fever, and I imagined like, well, what if a lot of people had birds in their homes, and there was this outbreak of parrot fever at that moment in time. Everybody would think that they were exposed or their kids were exposed, and we wouldn't take the time to positively verify that the outbreak was definitely coming from these like bird pets. We would just kill them. We would just rush to kill them. At least in the United States, we are very good at like jumping to conclusions, not waiting for verification, reacting to things in a very scared way. And so like I said, we have every reason to be scared. But that opening chapter is my way of describing the outbreak itself, yes, but also the fear, the incredible panic that's going to come about the first time people turn to the news and the news says there's a bacteria coming for you and your kids and there are no drugs to treat it. People are going to absolutely shit themselves on the day that finally happens.
So I've kind of heard that antibiotic resistance may not actually be as big of a problem as some people propose, because we'll find some other solution that'll save the day that's not antibiotic related. I mean, you can keep going down the line. Like, as soon as you try a new antibiotic, there will be a resistance that evolves soon enough. But I wasn't able to find any evidence of any of these other scenarios being actually that effective. Have you encountered anything like that in your research?
So there are two ways to answer that. So on one hand, we have orphaned antibiotics. So there's this drug fosfomycin that is not a spectacular antibiotic. It has a lot of side effects, and it's less effective than vancomycin. So when you go to the FDA, you've just spent millions of dollars researching antibiotics, and you say, well, here's what I have fosfomycin. The FDA looks at that drug and they say, do we need it? No, it's way worse than vancomycin in terms of its efficacy, and also it has tons of side effects. So it goes on a shelf in some university pharmacology lab, and it just sits there, orphaned and alone and sad, languishing, until down the line, that drug that never got FDA approval in some cases, but it never got FDA approval as an injectable antibiotic. So bacteria aren't being exposed to fosfomycin in large quantities, not in the US anyway. If there were some significant outbreak all of a sudden today of a vancomycin resistant bacteria, there's a good chance that you could use this orphaned antibiotic, fosfomycin, to treat that. It wouldn't be fun. It's not a fun drug to take, but it could potentially, maybe, depending on many factors, save your life if you get your hands on it. And the only way to get your hands on it would be to find people who can basically illegally synthesize and distribute that chemical. And as we all know, there are no systems in place at all for distributing illegal chemicals that people want to take. No such thing exists. And why are we even discussing it?
Does the CDC or the FDA or whatever have a contingency plan if suddenly there's like literally everything you throw at something?
Well, I mean, I'll put it to you this way. The federal government has big stores of documents that say, we've had a meeting and we need a contingency plan for XYZ, and we're going to come up with it on such date. And a lot of these plans are like not public information. And when you contact the federal government, as I did many times while I was writing this, to say, what's your contingency in the case of X? What's your because that's what I mean. That was that's what the book is. The federal government doesn't have a tendency to get on the phone with you and tell you exactly what the plan is for XYZ contingency. So presumably a lot of the quarantine procedures that we know about from something like the tiny little instances of Ebola that we've had so far are sort of what they have in mind. There's a quarantine center at the University of Indiana. Anyway, some unexpected Midwestern university has the best quarantine in the country. And as far as exactly how they'll roll out some plan to stop an outbreak of antibiotic resistant bacteria, we kind of don't know. We kind of don't know exactly. We won't know exactly until it happens.
When you were hitting up the federal government asking them about these plans, did it raise suspicions? Because that kind of ties into this question I have about...
I think I'm probably on a lot of lists.
Well, you mentioned in the book about how antibiotic or drug-resistant bacteria could be used as bioterrorism.
Not drug-resistant bacteria, but bacteria in general have been used as bioterrorism, yeah.
But it seems like it's really rare because it seems like it's kind of a clumsy way to kill a lot of people. If you want to do something, there's other ways that are probably more effective.
You said it.
Yes. But how effective really would this be at?
It's tough to say because, when it comes to something like MRSA, you have to get that into people's blood. Like if you MRSA's not a bacteria that MRSA's not like Salmonella, where you eat it and it gives you a digestive infection. It gives you a digestive disease. I wish I was an epidemiologist so that I could tell you in more detail about this, because somebody's going to come along and say, no, you can eat MRSA and get a MRSA infection. The primary way that people experience MRSA infections is as superficial infections that turn into septicemia or something like that. As far as antibiotic staph that they're getting from something like when the Oregon cult from Brave, what is that Netflix documentary called?
I haven't seen it.
Oh, okay. There was that sort of the Rajneeshi cult in Oregon exposed people to just regular stomach bug bacteria. You give people something like that, and you could potentially, that's something that could potentially kill tons and tons and tons of people. I wish I could tell you which. The Infectious Disease Society of America, I think, is the acronym. They wrote a sort of scenario about tainted milk. And people ingesting tainted milk, and that causing hundreds of millions of deaths, or not hundreds of millions of deaths, but some high number of fatalities from that. And it's not totally clear that that terrorism through tainted milk is like an effective way of killing people, but like so many things for this book, it's like we won't know until the day finally comes that somebody tries it.
Right. Since this is a drug podcast, have you encountered much about antibiotic resistance in the injection drug using community in your research?
That's something I should have looked into. But I mean, as I'm now rolling out the actual book itself, people come to me with things like that, like, well, did you write about an infection that begins with people's needles that they use for intravenous drug use, and that feels like such an oversight, but and it does now that you're saying it to me, but that's just you interacting with the book, everybody has the power to do what I did and just imagine the consequences of these things these things occurring. Like,
Well, you could have probably written a book about any of these chapters, an entire book based on just the Jurassic.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Well, somebody did. His name was Michael Crichton. But no, I mean, but like, you know, to your point, like safe injection sites, are obviously, if I showed this book to somebody at a safe injection site, they'd be like, well, I'll tell you what'll happen the day that the antibiotics don't work anymore, because those are the terms that they think about. When they think about bacteria, they think about tainted needles. And I didn't get there when I was writing it, but like, you know, if it prompts a discussion like that, then great. You know, that's exactly what I was trying to do when I wrote it.
Well, I don't think it was an oversight, but I do want to bring up the topic a little bit. It is something that I've encountered as a drug policy reporter. For example, there's this 2009 study, Patterns and Determinations of Inappropriate Antibiotic Use in Injection Drug Users, which found three things. The first is unmonitored individuals may be at increased risk for allergic reactions, drug-to-drug interactions, and other adverse effects. I think some of the reasons for this could be, why are people who inject drugs more at risk for infections? Is because not having access to sterile syringes or poor health outcomes from nutrition. Second, their infections may not be adequately treated because a leftover supply of antibiotics is unlikely to be sufficient for a full course. And this could happen because if you're an injection drug user, you're at more risk for being arrested or robbed. You can lose your medications that way if you're picked up off the street.
Every time you bulldoze a homeless encampment,
you're increasing the risk for antibiotic resistance. And the third thing they found is that self-directed antibiotic treatment may be initiated for inappropriate indications, particularly for abscesses. I think this one comes down to education. Often injection drug users are isolated from society. They are outside the healthcare system. And the point is antibiotic resistance is another example of how we need to humanize drug users. And there needs to be better education among drug use about antibiotics. This is why supervised consumption sites are so important to me and others, because they're often the first step for introducing some people to the healthcare system. If getting sterile syringes is the only healthcare they're getting, it can make a big difference and tamp down some of the spread of these infections. I'm not saying, of course, that we should be blaming drug users if an outbreak occurs. I don't really know how much of a risk it is from this community spreading to everybody else. Probably just the same as anything else in this scenario. I'm just trying to emphasize less stigma and not more, to encourage greater communication. And the same goes with the HIV and hepatitis C infections. Sorry, I'm kind of ranting. But
no, this is great.
The same goes with HIV and hepatitis C, because places that don't have syringe access programs see higher incidences of bloodborne diseases spread even among non-drug users. You can look at Florida, for example, or Indiana, where Mike Pence kind of delayed implementation of a syringe access program. And the Nation recently reported that as new research from Yale School of Public Health, published in the British medical journal The Lancet, showed that the whole program in Mike Pence, Indiana, was so marred by chaos and disorder that it actually had little effect on the outbreak. So it's not just like, you can't just like be like, oh, there's one syringe exchange, which is what Florida did. They had one in the entire state, and Florida has the highest rate of HIV in the country. So you have to really take these communities seriously, not treat them as criminals, not try to just isolate them from society, because that just keeps them away and furthers the risk of spreading diseases, I think.
Yeah, and like that is something that cropped up again and again and again as I was researching this book, is that like there's always going to be somebody on the margins of society who is going to take the brunt of whatever happens. That's just a pattern when bad things happen. When bad things happen, it happens the worst to people on the margins, just simply because the infrastructure that we have for treatment or for not necessarily in medical situations, but any sort of situation, the infrastructure that we have for helping people isn't designed to help the people that we marginalize. Just across the board, when any bad thing happens, marginalized people get the worst of it.
Are there any other solutions about antibiotic resistance we should mention? In your book, you go over sick leave being this novel concept in the West, and also condoms. I think I was reading something recently about somebody calling for a second contraceptive revolution.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I think we need that.
Because and you hate to be Lisa Simpson about it, and like it's very funny to do memes or whatever about how condoms suck, and like you can't really fight that. You can't really fight somebody saying like, oh, they don't feel good on my dick. Okay, well, they don't. But like these are bacteria, and we have a very surprisingly effective prophylactic. That's why they're called that, prophylactic, for these bacteria that you can use. It already exists. They're already available everywhere.
They're cheap as fuck. You get used to them.
Yeah. So like that is I mean, those kinds of public health things are, as the antibiotic resistance fear crops up, those kinds of public health things just they'll kind of start to jump out at you more when there's no drug. We were talking about that tainted milk thing, even more so with tainted meat. When there's no drug to treat a bacteria that you might get from a rare steak, then when you glance down at that warning on the bottom of the menu that says, you can get bacteria from this steak if you don't get it cooked well, you might read that a little bit differently when there aren't like plentiful drugs to clean up that bacteria for you. When that could turn into septicemia and kill you, then that might be something that you'll think about a little bit differently, despite what like Anthony Bourdain or whoever people are watching this week on the Food Network says about cooking meat rare. Like, you might not want to do that anymore. And then another thing is hospitals. It was really eye-opening to have doctors talk to me about what they call process, and process is just keeping people clean. People are filthy, and then they come into the hospital and they sit there for God knows how long. There are delays before they can get their surgery, and no matter if they've bathed, they become filthy again. We're all filthy. I'm filthy. You're filthy. We're covered with bacteria. And and to have a doctor explain that, like, you don't get MRSA because there was MRSA on his scalpel. You get MRSA because you touched some MRSA while you were, you went for a walk in the hospital. You touched an IV bag, or you touched a wall, and the wall had some bacteria on it. It's fine on your hand, but once it's on your hand, where it's not really hurting you on your hand, but then you scratch your belly, and now you have it on your belly. It's not hurting you there either. But then you go for surgery, and maybe the iodine missed that spot after you scratched it. And then the scalpel pushes through that spot where you touched your belly, and that MRSA goes straight into your wound. And that's how you get an infection. And if you can kind of explain that to people step by step, and they start to think about, while they're in the hospital, then they start to think about like what's on their hands, and how are they behaving, and how are they thinking about the bacteria that are all around them. And one thing I gotta point out is there's no place where there's more antibiotic resistant bacteria than a fucking hospital. The places are swimming with them because they're also swimming with antibiotics. So, we will think more in terms of this term process as we think more about as we worry more about antibiotics. And can I get the one more point about this?
Yeah.
So for the book, I went to this city in India called Surat, where there'd been in I believe 1994, there was an outbreak of the plague. Bacteria don't get much scarier than that. But this outbreak this was an outbreak that only killed a few dozen people, which is, a lot of people to die. But when you think about an outbreak of the plague, it sounds like it should kill 1 million people. It's the plague. It's the granddaddy of all bacterial illnesses. And this, by the way, was the pneumonic plague, meaning it's the variant that you can spread by coughing on people, which, bubonic plague has to be spread by fleas. You get it from flea bites. But if you can spread it just and give someone the plague, that's about as scary as it gets. And only like 55 people died in Surat that year. And the reason was awareness. The reason is that we are no longer medieval people. In pretty much every country in the world, you see this lately. I think 2 years ago there was a bad outbreak of plague that I think they're still living through in Madagascar. But in nearly every country in the entire world, people know to be scared of the plague, and they know what it is. They know that it's a microbe. They know that it's a contagious microbe, and that it spreads. That these things spread. You generally know that you spread. You know how you spread germs, and when the plague was new, not when the plague was new, but during the Black Death, in that era, people were ignorant, and they were, on the whole, a lot poorer than they are now. So poor, in fact, that they couldn't afford clothes, and so you would feel inclined to maybe steal clothes off a corpse, and it wouldn't really matter if somebody had told you that the person who had died in those clothes had died of plague, because for all you knew, plague was something that came from the devil. And to be told that came from their clothes that sounded just as much like a superstition as anything else. And you're cold and you need those fucking clothes. And, so my point is just that we live in quite a different world than we did during the Black Death. And, like, don't get me wrong, septicemia is a horrible way to die, and more people are going to. Like that's the big takeaway. Septicemia is a bad, scary, painful way to die, and in the book I give a detailed account of what it is like to die from it.
Yeah, it's pretty gross.
Thank you. But if there is a positive takeaway, it's that I think maybe we overrate drugs as sort of the ultimate solution to the problem of bacteria. We have other ways, like we were just saying about condoms and steak and all that, of dealing with this stuff. It's not great that the drugs are going away. we really liked those. That was great. But there are other that we have a lot of approaches to this problem.
So let's move on to the day doping is allowed at the Olympics. This is an interesting scenario to me. First of all, I don't give a fuck about the Olympics. I never have. I don't think I ever will. I kind of get the role that sports play in society of like taming down this aggressive tribalist ego that is in our roots as primates. But, other than that, I don't really find a lot of joy in the participation of highly capitalistic commercialized sports. That's just my personal opinion. But
it's popcorn entertainment.
I think what you're getting at with this question is like, why don't we allow doping in organized sports? Because isn't the point to see how fucking fast you can go or how much you can lift? And if you can use other tools to help you get to that point, what's wrong with that?
So, I mean, I really tried not to be too polemical in this book. I do get polemical. I do get openly polemical in the chapter on ending modern slavery, because I think that's one that people just sort of like try not to think about.
I mean, we're talking on these devices that were probably built with slave labor.
Exactly. So with this chapter, it was a bit hard to resist that tendency because the debate can just be so goddamn silly. The debate around drugs in sports, I open with a guy saying to another guy, if you allow drugs in sports, that's like allowing motorcycles in foot races, and it's just like, it's patently absurd to view it that way. It's also not, because the rules of the sport say you don't take the drugs. If you take the drugs and the referees, as it were, catch you doing it, you've broken the rules. You are subject to punishment, in this case, like being stripped of your medal. So you're a rule breaker, and it's just like whatever, traveling in basketball. It's a violation of what you were supposed to do. You didn't do what you were supposed to do. But with this one, when you look at this topic closely, you see that fairness in the Olympics is a very sort of flimsy concept. It's not on the concept of fairness in the Olympics is on a balsa wood foundation that's very rickety and ready to break apart at any moment. You see something when you see something like the Russian doping scandal that got them pseudo banned from the most recent Olympics. That feels wrong. It feels like, they were scamming the Olympics and they need to be kicked out. If you look at it a little bit more closely, then you see a situation like happened a couple of years ago in tennis, and it wasn't Olympic tennis, but the drug monitoring was done by WADA, which is an Olympic associated monitoring organization. They found that Maria Sharapova had been using this drug called meldonium, which is like an over-the-counter heart medication that's really, really popular in Eastern European drug sports supplements. And she was using meldonium. She wasn't supposed to. How did it happen? She didn't read an email that said you have to stop taking meldonium. She didn't see the email. She didn't look on her bottle of sports vitamins and notice that it says meldonium on there and stop taking them. And they investigated her and they said, oh, well, look at that. You were taking meldonium, dead to rights. You did it. The rules said you couldn't, and you did, and so you're banned for a year. But when they wrote that report, they also said, we don't think you were malicious in doing this. We think you were following the rules in good faith, you thought, and you accidentally broke a rule, but these are the breaks, so you're banned for a year. So she'll always have that scar on her record. But the thing about meldonium is that we don't know if that really makes you better at sports. We're basing that off of suppositions, some common sense.
Right. There haven't been clinical trials on some of these supplements.
No, there haven't been clinical trials on most of these things. So one of the really interesting things about writing about this topic was that this guy that I spoke to, Bill Mallon, who was a doctor for a lot of years at the Olympic Games, he follows this very closely because he's there treating people. And he told me, well, most of the drugs that people take for sports, they don't know whether that, they have no clue. It's not actually doing anything for them. They just take it because they think it probably helps. He said steroids, we're certain that makes people stronger. And there have been there was a survey of all of the studies on steroids in sports shows basically an absolutely ironclad, we are very certain, you can state pretty generally that steroids make you 20% stronger. That is about what the numbers say. They make you 20% stronger. In other words, a lot stronger. And so when it comes to weight-based events at the Olympics, that's going to do a lot. But the rest of it, we kind of don't know. We think think that what do you call it? EPO, the Lance Armstrong drug. We're pretty sure that makes people more effective at things like cycling and running, but we're not positive, and the rest of them we're really not positive. So we're policing this stuff based on a lot of guesswork, you know. So that's just one of the reasons why all of this like Olympic fairness policing, not on the steadiest foundation in the world.
In the future, I think all drugs will eventually be legal and regulated with almost no exceptions, just because we have about 100 years of data on prohibition and it doesn't work. There's got to be something else. And eventually we'll probably have legal markets for cocaine and meth and heroin. And they will, I think the best way, from talking to experts about this, is that they will allow milder alternatives to have more access and lots of drug treatment access and lots of harm reduction and all this other stuff. So eventually we'll probably have a world where it's like, take meth, who cares? It's not a big deal. And that would apply to the Olympics as well. So you take meth so that you can run faster. Although you talk about how amphetamines aren't exactly the most effective for enhancing your abilities necessarily.
No, amphetamines are an interesting one when it comes to sports, because what it looks like they do is they make you feel better around the time that it comes to like practice. If you're somebody if you need to train, you got to get on your bike in the morning. If you take meth to get amped up to get out there and practice, it'll help you in that regard. But if you are actually at the Olympic Village getting ready to do your cycling competition, there are competing scientific studies on what would actually happen. A lot of it shows that you'll overheat. You'll overheat a lot faster than somebody who is not on amphetamines. It's probably a bad idea to take them at your actual event. There's a little bit of conflicting data. And I mean, it goes without saying, if you've ever taken Ritalin or something like that, the way that it makes you feel is amped up and ready to do some do some physical stuff. So I mean, you know, that's kind of what we're going off of when we say like, well, it's obviously performance enhancing, but since it has other side effects, it's like we won't know until that Olympics. That's when we'll find out. That's when we'll find out exactly what effect it has. We'll say like, well, these people were on meth and they did XYZ. These people weren't on meth, and you know, they did better, or they did worse. We don't know yet. You know, like did you ever play the video game Metal Gear Solid?
Just the fifth one.
Oh, okay. I don't know if it's still in the fifth game, but when in the first couple of Metal Gear Solid games, if you wanted better sniper accuracy, then you would take benzodiazepines that were like you would find benzodiazepines lying on the ground, take them, and then is that still in Metal Gear Solid 5?
I think they made up names of these drugs. One of them is called Acceleramin, and the other one's like Focus Min or something.
Yeah.
They sound like drugs, but I didn't look them up. I don't think they're real.
So in a video game, it's 1-to-1. You take it, it makes your shooting better. And that is how the Olympics evaluates that, you know, that class of drugs. When you take them for a shooting event, they say, oh, your accuracy is definitely improved. But the real world Olympic actual in the Olympic Stadium doing a shooting event, taking diazepam versus somebody who's not taking diazepam, we do not know yet if that will make you better in the actual Olympic in an actual Olympic shooting event. If that will make you better, some of it probably will. You know, there was this guy named Doc Ellis who. A baseball player in the 70s who pitched a no-hitter on LSD. Does that mean that all pitchers should take LSD before they get on the mound? Probably not, but we don't know. We don't know yet because we haven't been able to do the sort of like peer-reviewed trials that would tell us that information with any certainty.
I love that story of Doc Ellis. There's a really great animation out there about it.
Yeah. If you haven't seen it, it's great.
Yeah, and I wonder. I mean, I wasn't there, obviously, but I wonder if the reason why he was able to pitch a no-hitter was because he was on LSD, and everybody up to bat was like, "Why the hell is he freaking out?" And just got distracted. Like, who knows if it was the ability of the time dilation of acid being able to like focus in or something, or if it's just him being weird.
But I mean, that you make an interesting point, because like if you're on LSD, then something is happening with you psychologically. So baseball, which is an Olympic sport, by the way, baseball has a psychological component to it. It's kind of like poker in that way. So who knows? Psychotropic. There could be, taking psychedelic drugs or taking drugs that only affect your mental state could really make the difference between winning and losing in baseball. We don't know.
Yeah. In order for that to happen, the World Anti-Doping Agency would have to be abolished. And what a name, the World Anti-Doping Agency.
WADA, yes.
It makes NIDA sound like it's like a pro-drug organization. But they would have to be abolished. The Olympic Council would have to come to the conclusion, this is what you write in your book, that rules against the drugs are no longer worthwhile. Then they write a report calling for WADA to be downsized or for its mission to be changed. And from there, we'd suddenly probably see as you write, like a huge influx of people taking all kinds of weird things to improve their performance. And that would probably be equivalent to a clinical trial, because you can't really do a clinical trial. You can't be like giving meth to people to make them run faster that would not pass an ethics review board.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, I mean, you can look at the history of the Olympics and kind of see how this would play out. Like look at the movie Chariots of Fire. That kind of precipitated the beginning of a performance enhancing technique called hiring a coach and training, which people had not been doing up until that point. They'd just been like a bunch of fine, strapping young lads showing up to the events and having a nice run and seeing who was the best, and everybody would shake hands afterwards and say, "Oh, you're a fast young man. Nice work." It was ungentlemanly and some would argue unfair for people in those days to hire a coach and train, and now it's become the norm to hire a coach and train. And so the way that you'll see some Olympic athlete maybe show up one year, come in 14th place in sprinting, and then the next year have some kind of training breakthrough and suddenly becoming in first place, you would see the same thing come about because people figured out what drugs to take in what quantity, and then they'd show up with their drug regimen all dialed in, and then they'd win those events. But what this guy that I spoke to named Mark Burnley at the University of Kent told me was that then there'd be a plateau. There'd be all of these Olympians showing up, maybe the first 8 years of the Olympics,
high out of their minds,
not knowing which chemicals to take, doing it wrong, and then after it kind of all got worked out and everybody figured out how to perform on drugs and which drugs worked, then it would kind of revert to the status quo, and you would see the Olympics that would pretty much look like the ones that we have now, more or less. Although that guy Bill Mallon, the doctor who worked at the Olympics for a long time, he told me that at that first event there'd be more injuries, that there are injuries that we associate with particularly steroid use. So torn patella tendons, he said, in athletes, in track and field athletes, is something that you see particularly when they're taking a lot of steroids. And also, to your earlier point, if people are injecting steroids right there in the Olympic Village, then something that we would see as well would be infections. They're opening up veins. They're just exposed. So we were talking about process, so all of a sudden we have to figure out how to make sure that people aren't, picking up all kinds of bacterial infections and spreading them to other athletes right there in the Olympic Village.
Well, to that point, I think that the spread of infections can be easily mitigated if you're shooting upright and if you have syringe disposal things everywhere. I mean, those should be everywhere already. They started putting them in Starbucks bathrooms and stuff like that. There's a really great book on there called How to Get Off Right. You can look it up, and it's free to download, and it's from the 90s, but a lot of the tips hold up. It basically teaches you how to shoot up correctly, which I've only ever done once, but it was, you basically had to clean the site with a alcohol swab, use a tie off to get the vein, and, always use a clean needle, because after using a syringe one time, the barb on the end, the little thing, will just start to get more barbed, and it just messes up your veins more and more. So you see those kinds of infections more in situations where people don't have access to clean syringes, sterile syringes. You shouldn't use clean and dirty terminology, that it's a hard habit to kick. So using sterile syringes every single time can help reduce those things.
Bleach. You find yourself needing bleach, according to that the famous Nirvana album.
Yeah, bleach will kill. I'm pretty sure it'll kill HIV, but it won't kill hepatitis C if you reuse a syringe. So this is why we got to stop being like, oh, injection drug use is this evil thing that only bad people do. Spread syringes out, let people have them, and we'll see a drop in infections. There's so much research.
Well, this brings up another point that I kind of address in the chapter, which is that right now, if you're a bodybuilder who wants to take steroids, that's so stigmatized that the place that you can go to find out, like I didn't know that bleach isn't the best idea to use. You need a better process than.
Well, you should use it if you don't have other options. Okay. When I used to work at a syringe access program, we would give out bleach kits. We tell them how to use it, and it'd be like, look, you probably shouldn't be cleaning your syringes. You should just be using a clean one every time. But if for whatever reason you can't use the bleach, it's going to at least make a difference on the HIV side, not the hepatitis C.
Got it. So, I mean, right now where you get that information is places like UG Bodybuilding, these bodybuilding forums, because unless you have a crooked sports physician, which is a very, 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 very expensive resource, you are not going to know. You're not going to know what quantity to shoot up at. You're not going to know where to get good steroids. You're not going to know anything other than what they tell you on some pretty sketchy websites. And unless you can find more reliable websites or more reliable podcasts for sort of how to do this stuff. And I don't really have an answer for this, but the big pharma companies could expect a windfall in terms of people using their drugs to prepare for the Olympics and to train and to try and qualify for the Olympics. I mean, it would cause a shift in the entire sports world and a turn toward these chemicals, but it's a devil's bargain for a big pharma corporation, because as we're now seeing with the opiate, the whole big opiate kerfuffle, when people turn on you and vilify you, then you maybe kind of try and sell the public on the idea that you're not for them just taking your drug willy-nilly all they want, even though clearly that is what you want. So the drug companies would be in a bit of a weird position, especially the drug companies that currently partly sponsor the Olympics. You can't just say like buy Merck performance enhancing drugs for all your performance enhancing needs. You're not going to be able to do it that way. That's going to probably get you in a little bit of trouble when bad things happen to some of these athletes. But you do want to have you do want to be manufacturing the most reliable, you want that customer loyalty, of course. But it'll be a hard needle for them to thread. Like I said, I don't have the answer for those. I can't really offer them any advice for what to do in these situations. There are some pretty rich corporations. I think they'll probably figure out. I think they'll be fine.
So it's this weird dichotomy. We really just have to kill the part of humanity, not literally kill them, but stop this idea that drugs are anything other than tools that can be used for good or bad. Not I don't know. We give too much personification to drugs, in my opinion. So that gets me to this point where, like, how do you think fans of the Olympics would react to a culture of people using drugs to enhance their performance?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds, I think, a lot more exciting than it really is. I sort of jokingly suggest in the book that you can attract people to a TV interview with a famous athlete showing you their doping regimen or something like that. Because as we've seen over the years, as we've seen on when Oprah interviews Mark McGuire or Barbara Walters interviews Lance Armstrong or something like that, there is something fascinating about athletes who dope. Right now, kind of because it's illicit. It's, they weren't supposed to. They're villains now. I had a poster of Lance Armstrong on my wall. Now that's a bad poster because he's a bad person.
We love redemption arcs in our society.
Sure, right. Well,
Britney Spears, for example.
Yeah, well, exactly. We love redemption arcs, but we also love public stonings. Which is, I mean, that's what we did to Britney Spears and Lance Armstrong. I think we can expect the public to behave rationally and without any hysteria. No, I mean they'll flip out, and they'll expect the Olympics, I would assume, to become this, as I call it in the book, a hulked out Circus Maximus. They will expect people to be like there on the sidelines of the sport, shooting up, like turning huge because they shot themselves up with an instant muscle drug, and then going out there and like throwing a javelin into the stratosphere. And that's just not what's going to happen. Athletes on steroids are going to look like athletes on steroids. Go just Google pictures of athletes on steroids. That's what they look like. And so when you pay money to see the like doped Olympics, I'm sorry to say you're going to be a little bit disappointed about what's happening down there. It's going to look a lot like what they've already been showing on NBC all these years. That's what you're going to see.
I wonder if that would cause like purists to rift and create like the pure Olympics or something, which sounds really bad when you say it that way, but
I didn't cover it in my book, but I mean, I think we could safely assume there is. I mean, there are 100% clean bodybuilding competitions, where they have to be tested year round to show that these are. I mean, a lot of these are like straight edge guys, straight edge bodybuilders, and it's kind of cool to know because if you look at bodybuilders, like they're all on steroids. At some phase, they were taking something. They were taking a lot of different drugs qualify as steroids or work as steroids. And if they show up in a blood test and you're out, you were taking steroids, regardless of whether it said steroids on the package. But it is interesting to know what bodybuilding is like when you don't take steroids, and it's interesting to see. So I mean, those kinds of competitions aren't worthless. It's kind of it's sort of interesting to show that delineation. And since long term steroids are not great for your body, I think that there could be interest for good reason in seeing competitions like that. Like you said, it's like, oh, these are pure and these over here are impure. Well, they're both pushing their bodies to the limits, and it's not like lifting weights without having taken steroids is not at all hazardous for your body. Whichever way you go, you are pushing your body to its limits, and watching what happens is the reason we pay money to watch sports. So I just think it just creates an interesting delineation, if you will.
Well, I think this is a good place to wrap up. So your new book is called The Day It Finally Happens.
And it's coming out on the 17th in the US, and it's coming out on September 4th in the UK. Is this podcast coming out before September 4th? Okay. So I don't know. It could be. It's almost. So if you're in the UK, the book's probably available now. Go to WH Smith's immediately and get your hands on it.
People can find you on Twitter, Mike Lee Pearl.
Yep, you can find me there, and you can find stuff I write at various places online.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on the program.
Thanks for having me. This was really fun.
In my kitchen.
Yep, it is a nice kitchen.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Narcotica. You can follow us on Twitter at Narcocast or on narcocast.com. Narcotica is an independent production by Christopher Maraff, Zachary Siegel, and myself, Troy Farah. Our co-producer is Aaron Ferguson, who has just been killing it lately, and our theme music is by Glass Boy. Additional music by Pictures of the Floating World. Narcotica is sponsored by Billy Bob's Big Long Slong-Shaped Bongs. Just kidding. That's a made-up product, I hope. In all seriousness, we don't want to clutter this program with stupid ads. So thank you so much to our Patreons who help keep this program free from corporate influence. We couldn't do it without you. If you want to help us out, join dozens of pro-drug advocates on our Patreon. Or help us get the word out. Give us a rating wherever you get your podcasts. We're finally on Spotify! Tell your friends about us, and carve our name into the bathroom mirror at Burger King. If you want to send us a suggestion, tell us about the medical benefits of cocaine, or just want to say hi, you can email us at tips@narcocast.com. That's all for now. Take care.